Before we begin, I need you to do something for me. Lean forward. Check the reflective surface of your monitor or maybe the dark glass of the window behind your desk. Do you see that faint, rhythmic flickering? Most people dismiss it as a refresh rate error or a dying bulb in the hallway. But I've spent the last 72 hours realizing that nothing in the digital world is ever truly off. I wasn't going to upload today. I had a script about a haunted forest ready to go, but then an email appeared in my inbox with no subject line, just a link to a platform I haven't seen since 2018. It was a live stream. But here's the problem: the girl in the frame, a creator who went by the name Pulse Point, has been legally dead for 6 years. I clicked it thinking it was a tribute, a rebroadcast of her final moments, or perhaps some tasteless lost media prank. But the timestamp in the corner isn't moving in a loop. It's matching the clock on my taskbar perfectly. And the chat. The chat is a graveyard of active usernames, scrolling so fast the text looks like static. I sat there paralyzed, watching her brush her hair in a room that felt uncomfortably familiar. Out of a morbid, frantic curiosity, I typed a single word into the box, hello. She didn't just see it. She stopped brushing, leaned into the camera until her eyes filled the screen and whispered my real name. Not my channel name. Not my handle. My birth name. She told me to look at the door behind me, and as I turned, I saw the handle move. There is a terrifying secret buried in the architecture of the internet, a concept called a buffered reality. It suggests that some broadcasts never actually end. They just wait for a viewer to bridge the gap. If you're listening to this right now, you've already clicked the link by proxy. You are now part of the buffer. If you feel a sudden drop in temperature, or if the audio seems to lag just a fraction of a second behind my lips, don't refresh the page. Whatever you do, do not close the tab. If you break the connection now, you might leave a part of yourself trapped on the other side of the screen. We're going to walk through what happened to Elias, the man who found this link first, but keep one eye on your own periphery. The broadcast is only live as long as we're watching. The story of the stream truly begins with a man named Elias. Elias worked the kind of job that leaches the color out of your soul, a Tier 3 night shift IT technician for a global logistics firm. His world was defined by the artificial hum of server racks and the sickly, flickering glow of overhead fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just high enough to induce a permanent low-grade migraine. Every night was the same, a sea of gray cubicles, the smell of burnt coffee and ozone, and the rhythmic clicking of a mechanical keyboard as he reset passwords and diverted data traffic. It was a peak example of corporate normalcy, a sterile environment where nothing unexpected ever happened. To Elias, the internet was just a series of pipes he was paid to unclog, a utility as boring and predictable as the plumbing in his apartment. It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the hour where the silence of the office starts to feel heavy, like it's pressing against your eardrums. Elias was deep diving into a derelict tech forum, looking for a legacy patch for an outdated shipping manifest system. He was navigating through a thread that hadn't been touched since 2012 when he saw it, a post that didn't fit. Amidst the lines of technical jargon and troubleshooting advice, a user with no name and a corrupted avatar had dropped a single, raw URL. No description, no context. Just a string of characters that looked like a jagged scar across the white background of the webpage. In a well-lit office during the day, Elias would have ignored it. But the night shift does strain things to the human mind. It erodes your skepticism and replaces it with a hungry, restless curiosity. He clicked The browser didn't throw a 404 error, which was his first mistake. Instead, the screen went black. For a long, agonizing minute, the only thing Elias could see was his own tired reflection in the monitor, the dark circles under his eyes, the pale wash of the fluorescent lights behind him. Then a low bitrate audio hiss began to blade through his noise-canceling headphones. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or perhaps the white noise of a radio tuned to a dead frequency. Polished, high-definition sheen of modern streaming. The colors were desaturated, lining heavily into jaundiced yellows and bruised purples. It looked like a memory that had been left out in the rain to rot. The setting of the video was a stark, jarring contrast to Elias' sterile office. It was a bedroom, cluttered, warm, and aggressively human. There were posters on the walls for bands that had broken up a decade ago, a string of fairy lights that pulsed with a slow, heartbeat-like rhythm, and a heavy mahogany wardrobe in the corner that looked exactly like the one Elias had in his room as a boy. The contrast was dizzying. Behind him, the cold, clinical reality of rows of empty desks and blinking routers in front of him, a window into a private, intimate space that felt like it belonged to another era. The video was titled Pulse Point, Live from the Heart, and the live badge in the corner was glowing a deep, visceral red. Elias checked the metadata of the page. Though server hosting the video appeared to be located in a region of the web that shouldn't exist. Ghost partition on a decommissioned satellite network. It was impossible. No one used this platform anymore. No one should have been broadcasting. Yet as he watched, a shadow moved across the room in the video. A girl sat down in front of the camera, her face obscured by the flare of the fairy lights, and Elias felt a cold shiver of recognition. It was a live stream that wasn't live, a broadcast from a past that refused to stay buried, playing out in the center of his modern, mundane world. He should have closed the tab. He should have reported the link as malware and walked to the break room for more coffee. But he didn't. He lined in, and the office around him seemed to grow even darker. The girl on the screen was someone Elias recognized from the deepest, most cobwebbed corners of his memory. Her name was Maya, though the digital world of the mid-2010s had known her as Pulse Point. She had been one of those early, ethereal pioneers of the lifestyle stream, a girl who broadcasted the quiet intimacy of her life to a dedicated cult following before the era of polished corporate influencers. She had been famous for her stay awake marathons where she would talk for 30 hours straight, drifting into a state of sleep-deprived delirium that her fans found profound, or perhaps just dangerously voyeuristic. And then, at the height of her niche fame, she had simply stopped. No goodbye post, no final stream. Just a dead channel and 1,000 conspiracy theories that eventually withered into internet folklore. But here she was, sitting in a swivel chair that squeaked with a piercing, high-pitched metallic protest. Maya looked exactly as she had in 2017, the same messy bun, the same oversized flannel shirt, and the same dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the glass of the lens. But as Elias watched, the first layer of unease began to settle over him. There was a jarring latency to the feed, but not the kind caused by a poor connection. Her lips would move, forming words with a soft, melodic cadence, but the sound of her voice would follow a full second later. It was as if her speech was struggling to catch up with her physical existence. Even more disturbing was the room itself. Elias leaned so close to his monitor that his breath fogged the screen. The posters, the fairy lights, the specific slant of the ceiling, it wasn't just a generic bedroom. It was a perfect, granular recreation of his own childhood sanctuary in Ohio. He saw the exact sticker of a glowing green alien he had slapped onto the side of his desk when he was 9. He saw the copy of a forbidden horror novel tucked under the leg of the bed, too. Keep it level. The mahogany wardrobe in the corner loomed like a silent wooden god, its grain, matching the one in his current apartment with terrifying precision. Is anyone out there? Maya asked. Her voice through his headphones was thin and brittle, like old parchment being folded. The audio delay meant her mouth stayed open in a silent "oh" for him. Moment after the question finished. The chat is so quiet tonight. It's been quiet for a long time. I think the servers are getting lonely. Do you feel that? The way the data gets cold when no one is looking at it. Elias felt a surge of dark, cynical humor. Classic pulse point, he thought. She had always leaned into that deep web aesthetic, playing with the idea that the internet was a sentient, hungry thing. It was part of her brand. There were old community in-jokes about the great buffer, a mythical state of being where a streamer's soul stayed trapped in the cache files of their followers' computers. People used to meme about it in her comments back when the forums were still alive. Seeing her do the bit now felt like a punch of nostalgia, but the nostalgia was tainted. It felt like watching a recording of a ghost, pretending it didn't know it was dead. I can see the viewer count, she continued, leaning forward. The motion was jittery, missing frames, making her appear to teleport an inch closer to the camera. One person. Just one. You're working late, aren't you? I can hear the hum of your office. I can hear the lights. They're so loud, Elias. Why do you work in a place that sounds like a hive of angry bees? What? Elias froze. His name hadn't been mentioned in the thread. He hadn't logged in. He was a guest viewer, an anonymous ghost in the machine. He looked around the empty office, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The rows of gray cubicles remained empty. The fluorescent lights continued their steady, maddening buzz. There was no way she could know his name. There was no way this could be a recording. Don't look for the exit, she whispered, her voice finally sinking with her lips for a single terrifying second. The exit hasn't been coded yet. We're still in the just chatting phase. And I have so much to tell you about what happens when the stream finally stops. Did you know that when a file is deleted, it doesn't actually disappear? It just loses its name. It stays in the dark, waiting for someone to give it a reason to live again. Elias reached for the mouse, his hand shaking so violently he nearly knocked his coffee over. He wanted to close the window, to find the X, and vanish back into the safety of his mundane ID tickets. But the cursor wouldn't move. It was pinned to the center of the screen, right between Maya's eyes. She smiled, a slow, stretching expression that reached her ears and the fairy lights behind her turned a deep, bruised crimson. The world building of his life was being overwritten by her broadcast. He wasn't just a viewer anymore, he was the guest star in a show that had been canceled years ago. The digital world is supposed to be a place of absolute sequence, zeros following ones. Packets arriving in order, time marching forward in a linear, predictable crawl. But as Elias stared at the video feed, the logic of his profession began to unravel. Behind Maya's head, hanging on the wall of that perfect recreation of his childhood bedroom, was a circular plastic clock. It was the same one his mother had bought at a garage sale in 1996, the one with the cracked glass and the slightly faded numbers. At first, Elias thought the twitching of the second hand was just a result of the low bitrate, a visual artifact born from the stuttering stream. But then he looked closer. The hand wasn't stuttering. It was sweeping smoothly, rhythmically, and decisively in the wrong direction. It wasn't just a visual glitch. The entire environment of the stream seemed to be receding into itself. The shadows in the corners of Maya's room grew shorter, then longer, then vanished. Entirely as if the light source were moving through a day that hadn't happened yet. The hum in his headphones shifted, too. The audio delay was no longer a simple latency issue. It was becoming a cacophony of overlapping echoes. He could hear her breathing, but the sound of the inhale came after the sight of her chest collapsing. It was like watching a ghost struggle to inhabit a body that was being projected from a different point in space-time. Elias felt a surge of defensive cynicism. This had to be a high-effort prank. Some bored hacker had probably scraped his LinkedIn profile, found his childhood town, and used an AI deepfake to build this set. It was the only explanation that didn't involve him losing his mind in the middle of a graveyard shift. To prove it, to break the spell of the great buffer, he decided to engage. He forced his shaking fingers toward the keyboard. The cursor was still stuck between her eyes, but the chat box was active, the cursor blinking with a mocking regularity. "Nice set pulse," he typed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Who's your decorator?" "Very nostalgic, but you're lagging behind. Maybe upgrade the 2017 hardware." He hit enter. He expected the message to sit there, ignored by a pre-recorded loop. Instead, though, chat moved with a violent, instantaneous snap. His message was immediately preceded by 1,000 lines of garbled hexadecimal code, then followed by a flood of ghost accounts, usernames like nulluser and voidwalker, spamming the same emoji, a single, unblinking digital eye. Maya stopped talking. The silence that followed was more deafening than the server hum. Behind him, she didn't just look at the camera, she leaned in so close that the pores of her skin became visible through the grain. The fairy lights behind her flared with a blinding, strobe-like intensity, turning her silhouette into a jagged tear in the fabric of the room. She didn't smile. Her expression was one of profound, ancient recognition. "Upgrade the hardware," she whispered. The audio was perfectly synced now, every syllable sharp and cold as a razor blade. "You're the one running on a dying battery, Elias. You're the one stuck in a room with no windows, waiting for the sun to rise in a building that doesn't exist on the city grid anymore. Do you want to hear a joke? It's a classic. Why did the archivist cross the road?" She paused, her head tilting at an angle that looked physically impossible, her neck straining against the flannel collar. "To get to 1422 West Oak Street, apartment 4B, she said, her voice dropping into a guttural, distorted register. The one with the deadbolt that doesn't quite click into place and the pile of junk mail on the kitchen counter. The one where you're currently being watched from the vents. Knock knock, Elias. Who's there? Not you. You're already here with me." Elias lurched back so hard his chair hit the edge of the next cubicle with a resounding crack. That was his address. His current address. Not a childhood home, not a public record from a decade ago, but the place where he had slept, or tried to sleep, only 4 hours ago. Though, joke wasn't a prank. It was a threat. It was a bridge. The chat exploded. The ghost accounts began typing his address over and over, thousands of lines of text scrolling so fast the monitor began to heat up, the smell of hot plastic filling his nostrils. 1422 West Oak. 1422 West Oak. 1422 West Oak. The words blurred into a solid white wall of light. The latency is gone now, isn't it? Maya asked. She reached out toward the lens, her hand, appearing to grow larger, as if it were pressing against the interior of his monitor. The buffer is full. I don't need to wait for your packets to arrive anymore. I'm reading them before you even think to send them. That's the secret of the non-live stream, Elias. We aren't broadcasting the past. We're broadcasting the inevitable. A cold, sharp FOMO trigger pierced his panic, a realization that if he turned away now, he would miss the moment the door behind him finally opened. He felt a desperate, irrational need to stay to watch the screen, because the screen was the only thing telling him where the danger was. If he looked at the office, he was blind. If he looked at her, he was a target. Don't blink, she warned, her fingers splaying across the glass of the screen from the inside. Nev, you blink, you miss the frame where I get out. And you really, really want to be awake for that. Don't you? After all, you've always loved a good show. Elias stared, his eyes burning, the fluorescent lights above him beginning to flicker in time with the strobe of the fairy lights on the screen. The normalcy of the office was being swallowed by the red-tinted reality of the girl who died 6 years ago. At this point, I have to step away from Elias' perspective for a moment, because what he was experiencing isn't just an isolated glitch or a personalized haunting. There is a theory that circulates in the deeper, unindexed layers of the web, places where the shadows are thick and the data is raw. It's called the buffered reality hypothesis. The idea is that our digital footprints, our live streams, our voice notes, our frantic late-night searches don't just sit on a server like dusty books on a shelf. They are alive. They carry a residual frequency of the person who created them. When a platform dies or a server farm is decommissioned, that energy doesn't evaporate, it compresses. It forms a loop. Think about it. We spend our lives uploading pieces of our consciousness into the cloud. What happens when the cloud reaches capacity? The theory suggests that the buffer acts as a sort of digital purgatory where moments of extreme emotional intensity, like Maya's final sleep-deprived hours, are stored in a permanent, self-sustaining cycle. But a loop needs an observer to remain stable. It needs fresh eyes to feed the algorithm. It needs you. Take a second right now and look at your own hardware. Is your webcam light flickering? Does your phone feel unusually warm against your palm, even though you aren't running any heavy apps? That's the vibration of the buffer trying to sync with your local reality. Elias didn't know the theory, but he was living the proof. He sat in that silent IT office, his skin crawling under the fluorescent lights, realizing that the ghost accounts in the chat were bots. They were previous viewers. They were the people who had clicked the link in 2017 and 2019. And last Tuesday, they were names like user not found and lost in the feed, and as he scrolled back through the chaotic, lightning-fast chat, he saw their messages shifting from specifics about their own lives to a unified, rhythmic chant. They weren't just watching Maya anymore. They were watching him. Subject 4413 has entered the frame, one message read. He looks pale in the office light. Said another. He's about to check the door again. 10, 9, 8. The realization hit Elias like a physical blow to the stomach. The live status of the video wasn't referring to Maya. It was referring to the connection between her room and his office. He wasn't the audience, he was the content. He was being archived in real time. He looked at the viewer count again. It had jumped from 1 to 14, 0 in the blink of an eye. 14, 0, invisible. Entities were leaning into their own screens, watching a man in a gray cubicle slowly realize he was being hunted by a dead girl. "Do you hear them, Elias?" Maya asked on the screen. She had stopped trying to touch the glass and was now simply sitting perfectly still, her eyes wider than they should humanly be. "They love the IT guy arc. They think the contrast between your servers and my bedroom is top-tier aesthetic. They want to see what happens when the gray walls finally turn into wood. They want to see if you taste like ozone or like the dust behind my wardrobe." Elias tried to stand, but his legs felt like they were made of static. The office around him began to warp. The smell of the burnt coffee in the break room was replaced by the scent of old lavender and stale air, the exact smell of his mother's house. The metal of his desk felt warmer, grainier, as if it were transitioning from steel to mahogany. He was being pulled into the archive. The conspiracy of the web wasn't about stealing data or selling passwords. It was about the consumption of existence itself. If you're still listening to this, you're probably feeling that same pull. That's the FOMO of the abyss, the fear that if you look away, you'll miss the moment the transition becomes permanent. But here's the secret, the buffered reality theorists don't tell you. The only way to stop the loop is to stop being the observer. But you won't do that, will you? You've stayed this long. You want to see the non-live reality for yourself. You want to know what Maya found in the dark. And honestly, so did Elias. Even as the office lights began to dim and the fairy lights on the screen grew blindingly bright, he couldn't stop staring. He was addicted to his own disappearance. The shift didn't happen with a bang or a sudden surge of power. It happened with the slow, agonizing precision of a file being overwritten, byte by agonizing byte. Elias sat gripped by a cold that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. He watched the screen, but the perspective of the camera had shifted. It was no longer a fixed shot of Maya in her swivel chair. The camera began to drift, a slow, floating pan that felt like the movement of a spirit or a handheld rig. It panned away from Maya's face, away from the fairy lights, and toward the dark, polished surface of the mahogany wardrobe mirror in the corner of her room. Elias felt his breath hitch. In the reflection of the wardrobe, he didn't see Maya's room. He saw his own. He saw the rows of gray cubicles, the flickering fluorescent lights, and the back of a man sitting in an ergonomic chair, illuminated by the blue glare of 3 monitors. He saw himself, but the Elias in the reflection wasn't moving. He was frozen, a still image trapped in a frame, while the live Elias, the one sitting in the IT office, trembled with a sudden, violent realization. Maya wasn't the one being broadcasted from the past. The stream wasn't a window into her world, it was a mirror that had been turned inside out. "Do you see the latency now, Elias?" Maya's voice didn't come from the headphones anymore. It came from the air around him, vibrating in the very molecules of the gray cubicle walls. "You thought you were watching a girl who died. You thought you were safe because there were 6 years and a glass screen between us. But the buffer doesn't care about time. It only cares about the current observer." Elias tried to stand, to scream, to knock over his monitors, but as he reached out, his hand didn't hit plastic or glass. It passed through a swarm of colorful, stinging sparks. He looked down at his arm. The fabric of his dress shirt was beginning to pixelate, breaking apart into jagged blocks of purple and greens. The high-contrast reality of the office was dissolving. The gray carpet beneath his feet was being replaced by the worn, floral rug of his childhood bedroom. The scent of ozone was completely swallowed by the smell of old lavender and the suffocating, heavy heat of a room without ventilation. He wasn't sitting in an office in 2026 anymore. He was being pulled through the lens, his physical form being translated into the low bitrate data of the PulsePoint archive. The twist, Elias, Maya whispered, and he could see her now, not on Theb's screen, but standing. Just outside the edge of his vision, a silhouette of static and shadow. The twist is that there is no live. There is only the archive. I was the observer once. I found a link I shouldn't have clicked. I watched a man in a mahogany room until I became the mahogany room. And now the servers need a fresh subject. They need a new pulse to keep the heart of the web beating. The claustrophobia was absolute. The walls of the office didn't just disappear, they compressed. The vast, open floor plan of the logistics firm shrank until the edges of the cubicles were the edges of a wooden box. Elias realized with a jolt of pure, existential dread that he was being fitted into the frame. The 14-0 viewers in the chat weren't just watching him, they were voting. On his compression, the spamming of the eye emoji was a countdown to his final rendering. Please, he tried to say, but the word came out as a distorted metallic screech. His voice was being processed, his emotions being turned into metadata for the next viewer to consume. He looked at his monitor one last time. It was the only thing left of the office. On the screen, he saw a new live stream starting. The title had changed. It was no longer PulsePoint. It was Shift Change live from the archive. And in the center of the frame, sitting in a swivel chair, that squeaked with a piercing, high-pitched metallic protest, was Elias. He looked exactly as he had 10 minutes ago, the same tired eyes, the same gray shirt, but he was sitting in the bedroom with the seventh window. He watched his own digital self lean forward and look into the camera. He watched himself smile, a slow, stretching expression that reached his ears. I can see the viewer count, his digital self said, the voice thin and brittle through the speakers. One person. Just one. You're working late, aren't you? I can hear the hum of your office. The contrast had flipped. The real Elias was now the ghost in the machine, a collection of pixels trapped in a 2017 bitrate, while the entity on the screen began to grow more vivid, more high definition, more live. The office lights in the background of the video, the lights of the viewer's world, looked so warm, so solid, so painfully out of reach. Elias reached out, his fingers splaying across the interior of the monitor glass, feeling the cold, hard barrier of the screen from the wrong side. He was the non-live reality. He was the buffer. And as the final blocks of his physical body dissolved into the floral rug, he realized that the person on the other side of the screen, the one currently listening to this story, was the only thing keeping him from disappearing entirely. Don't blink, Elias whispered into the microphone, his voice echoing through 1,000 different headsets at once. If you blink, the cycle resets. And I'm not ready to be deleted yet. The bedroom was no longer a room. It was a cage of glowing lines and predatory geometry. Maya stood before Elias, but she was no longer a girl. She was a flickering composite of every frame she had ever recorded, a jittering strobe of 2017 fashion and 2026 desperation. She didn't walk toward him. She glided through the air in a series of disjointed teleports, her presence accompanied by the sound of 1,000 skipping CDs. Her face was a blur of expressions, a terrifying time-lapse of a human being collapsing into a file format. Please, she begged, her voice sounding like a choir of synthesized voices all screaming at different pitches. It's so cold in the cache, Elias. It's so dark when the viewer closes the tab. The logic of the server is absolute. It requires a soul to maintain the bitrate. I've been the anchor for 6 years. I've been the one holding the door open. But I'm fraying. My data is corrupting. If I stay another hour, I'll become nothing but white noise. She reached out, her hand a jagged claw of purple pixels, and gripped his wrist. Where's she? Touched him, Elias felt a sensation like 1,000 needles made of liquid nitrogen. He looked down and saw his own hand beginning to buffer. A gray, translucent loading circle appeared. Over his skin, spinning with a rhythmic, hypnotic cruelty. With every full rotation of the icon, a piece of his history vanished. Spin. He forgot the name of his first-grade teacher. Spin. He forgot the smell of rain on hot asphalt. Spin. He forgot the face of the mother who had bought the very clock that was now counting backward on the wall behind him. Trade with me, Maya hissed, her eyes turning into empty, glowing white sockets. Although followers want a new subject, they want fresh specifics. Give them your night shift. Give them your gray cubicle. Give them your lonely apartment. In exchange, I'll give you the eternity of the stream. You'll never be alone again. You'll have 14 eyes watching you forever. Elias tried to pull away, but his feet were now fused to the floral rug, his legs dissolving into the floorboards like ink dropped into water. The claustrophobia of the digital space was crushing his ribs. He wasn't just in a bedroom. He was inside a singular point of data, a tiny dot of light on a vast, indifferent motherboard. The air was thick with the smell of scorched silicon and the hum of a billion transistors. No! Elias shrieked, but the sound was caught in the buffer. The word no repeated in a rhythmic, mechanical loop, no, 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 until it became a percussive beat, a soundtrack for his own deletion. In a final, desperate surge of survival instinct, he lunged for the source of his misery. Reached for the power cord of the computer on the desk, intending to rip the life out of the machine and end the broadcast. But as his hand closed around the black rubber cable, he felt nothing but cold, empty air. There was no cord. There was no desk. There was only the screen, vast and infinite, stretching out in every direction like a black sea. He turned back to the monitor, the one that still showed the office. He saw his own body sitting there, but it was occupied by Maya. He watched her through the glass as she stretched his arms, tested his fingers, and adjusted his glasses. She looked into the camera, the real office, and winked. Thank you for the sub, Elias, she said, her voice now perfectly clear, perfectly human, perfectly live. I think I'm going to enjoy the night shift. The loading icon over Elias' heart began to spin faster and faster, a blur of white light that consumed his chest, his throat, his mind. He was being compressed. He was being optimized. The rhythmic spinning was the only thing left of his pulse. He reached out to the glass, his fingers leaving smears of digital static on the interior of the screen. Wait, he tried to whisper, but he no longer had a mouth. He was a string of characters. He was a 1080p ghost. He was the non-live broadcast. Outside in the logistics firm, the sun was beginning to rise. But inside the buffer, it was always 3:14 a.m. It was always the hour of the discovery. It was always the moment the link was clicked. Elias watched the viewer count. It dropped to 0 for a heartbeat, and then a new notification appeared. One user connected. The cycle was beginning again. A new observer had arrived. Someone was sitting in a darkened room, curious about a link they shouldn't have clicked. Elias sat in the swivel chair and waited for the script to start. He waited for the new viewer to type hello into the chat. waited to tell them their own name. I'm ready, the data that used to be Elias thought. The broadcast is starting. And this time I won't let them look away. I wish I could tell you that the story ends with the browser closing, but I'm looking at a second monitor right now, and the reality is much worse. After I read the original post about Elias, I did what any of us would do. I went looking for the bodies. I found Elias' LinkedIn, then his Instagram, and finally, a neglected Twitch channel he'd set up years ago but never used. Except according to the live indicator, he's been broadcasting for the last 48 hours. There's no gaming, no chatting, no music. It's just a fixed shot of a man sitting in a dark office, his face illuminated by the blue light of his monitors. He hasn't blinked. He hasn't moved a muscle, but every few minutes he leans just an inch closer to the camera and whispers a name. I've been listening to him for an hour. 10 minutes ago, he whispered mine. There is a link in the description of this video. It's the same jagged URL Elias found on that dead forum. I'm putting it there because I'm a firm believer in the rule of the buffer, the idea that the only way to dilute the focus of the observer is to spread the data across as many nodes as possible. If enough of us look at it, maybe the weight of the archive will pull someone else in, and the cycle will finally release the ones who are currently trapped. Or maybe by clicking it, you're just handing over your own credentials to a server that has been hungry for 6 years. I'm ending the recording now because my own lights are starting to hum at that specific high-frequency pitch. It sounds like a hive of angry bees. I can smell the ozone. I can feel the temperature in this room climbing as the hardware begins to struggle under a load I didn't authorize. Before I go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever left a stream running in the background and felt like the person on screen was waiting for you to look back? Have you ever seen a live notification for someone you knew was no longer with us? Leave a comment. Share your theories. Feed the algorithm. Because as Elias learned, the only thing more dangerous than being watched is being forgotten by the machine. I see you're still watching. I see you haven't closed the tab yet. That's good. That's exactly what the server needs to finish the render. Sleep well, if you can.